Jessica Frost-Ballas here with a video for Scrapbooking Cards Today magazine. Today I'm sharing some of my favorite ways to use alcohol inks while creating this vibrant and cheery fall-themed card. So let's get started. First, I'm using Tim Holtz alcohol inks in Wild Plum, Sunset Orange, Vineyard, and Lemonade. You can use any alcohol inks you have or even alcohol marker refills. On my table, I have a 9x12 panel of Yupo synthetic paper. I'm also using Pinata Brass metallic alcohol ink and 99% isopropyl alcohol. You could also use Copic blending solution or Tim Holtz's alcohol blending solution. Finally, I have a few special tools for my alcohol ink work. Small dropper bottles I filled with brass ink and alcohol, a cheap synthetic paintbrush, and my secret weapon, a Conair 2-in-1 hot air curling brush that I'm using without the brush attachment. To start, I like to apply a good amount of isopropyl alcohol to the panel to get things moving. I tilt the paper a bit to move the alcohol around and then add a few drops of each color. Less is more here, you don't really need a lot of ink. Finally, I add a few drops of the metallic brass in the center of each color. The metallics have a tendency to sink to the bottom of the paper very quickly, and keeping them on the colored ink seems to help them not sink quite as fast. First, I tilt the paper to let the inks move a little organically and blend with each other in the alcohol. Then I bring in my hot air tool to continue moving around the ink and letting them blend. If the metallic doesn't sink to the bottom immediately, you'll get these really pretty metallic lines of color on top of the ink that you can move around with the air. Otherwise, they create a nice overall shimmer, but they won't be quite as noticeable as the lines of color. I continue using the heat tool until the ink is mostly dry and covers a good chunk of the panel. I can use the tool to push around the ink and create interesting designs and lines on my paper. You can find isopropyl alcohol in various percentages ranging from 70 to 91, 99, or 100. The percentage correlates to the amount of moisture content in the alcohol. The higher the percentage, the less water, which means the alcohol dries faster. I find 99 to be my favorite for alcohol ink work, as it gives me time to work with the inks but also doesn't take forever to dry as the 70 or 91 percentage does. You can experiment with the different percentages and find what you prefer. Also, as a safety note, I recommend wearing a mask when you work with these inks, as prolonged exposure to alcohol is not recommended. You can find specific safety recommendations online, but I use an N95 half-face respirator mask with filters that filter out the VOCs from alcohol evaporation. If you're working with a mask on, you should not be able to smell any of the alcohol fumes. I chose a more unusual fall palette for this card, but you can be more traditional with reds, orange, and yellows, or adapt this card design for any season or occasion you'd like. I also like working with a larger panel like this one, because while I might not love the entire panel, I can almost always find an A2 section that I do love, and then I can use the rest of the panel for other projects later. I don't throw away any of these scraps as there's always a use for them. Once I have my base layer in, I start going back in and adding more alcohol, more ink, and more metallic ink. I continue using my heat tool to move it around and blend it together. When the alcohol touches the dried ink, it will reactivate it, which helps with the blending. I've tried a lot of heat tools and more traditional heat guns for this technique, and have found that this hot air brush is my favorite tool. The other heat guns just get too hot and can melt or curl the synthetic paper. They also have a much stronger airflow, which doesn't give you as much control over the ink. Now, to be fair, using alcohol inks is generally an exercise in patience and loss of control, as you can't really control what happens on the paper. As a bit of a control freak myself, working with alcohol ink is a great exercise for me, as I need to just let go and let the process work. The good thing is you can always add more alcohol or more ink and just keep blending until you're happy with the way it looks. Once the panel is covered and mostly dry to the touch, you might find that you have some sticky areas where the ink is a little thicker. In humid weather, this tends to be more of a problem. You could just let the panel dry overnight, but I found a more exciting and sparklier fix for this particular problem. When the ink is just slightly tacky, you can press pieces of foil to the ink and it will transfer and stick. I press the foil to the panel and kind of firmly rub the foil along the sticky areas. I let it sit for a few minutes and then carefully peel up the foil. You can generally reuse the foil as long as there's not a lot of ink sticking to the back of the foil. If that happens, you'll transfer the ink if you reuse the foil, which might not be the look you're going for. As you can see, this just adds a little more shine to your piece. Next, I like to add a little texture and movement to the panel, so I splatter it with isopropyl alcohol using a cheap synthetic brush. You don't want to use any high quality or expensive brushes here, as the alcohol can really damage the bristles. I just dip the brush in a little alcohol and tap the brush to splatter the panel. After I splatter, I like to set it with my heat gun so the splatter doesn't continue to spread. As the ink reactivates, you might find a few sticky areas again, and you can just use more foil to get rid of those sticky spots. I also add splatters of the Pinata metallic brass alcohol ink for even more sparkle. Then I set the panel aside to dry completely. Once it's dry, I take a piece of acetate cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 and move it around the panel until I find the layout for my card background. Once I found it, I trim the panel down to an A2 base. Again, I keep all the extra pieces that I can use for die cuts or cardstock strips later. For today's card, I'm using a few leaf dies from the stamp market and a sentiment from Honeybee Stamps. I die cut the leaves from gold glitter cardstock and adhere them to the panel. To adhere the large leaf cluster, I add a little liquid glue to a piece of scrap paper and dip the die cut into the glue. This helps give a thin coating of glue to the back of the die without getting glops of glue on my alcohol ink panel. The large leaf cluster actually cuts out the inside of the leaves as well, but I decide to keep some of them for a little additional interest. I pop those up with foam mounting tape for more dimension. I stamp the sentiment from Honeybee Stamps onto black cardstock and heat emboss it with brass embossing powder. I also die cut the large word from gold glitter cardstock and black cardstock and adhere them together. I use foam mounting tape to adhere the sentiment and then finish the card with a few gold sequins. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed today's video and got some new ideas for your alcohol inks. Thanks so much for joining me today, and until next time, have an amazing day and happy crafting. Bye!